Hey, this video's been a long time coming. The title is clickbait. I'm not leaving YouTube, but if you follow me on other social media, you'd probably already know that someone in my life passed away, and then a few days later, one of my dogs died. So yeah, it's been hard. I've been going back and forth on whether to even talk about it at all the way up until writing this script, but I think I'll bring it up where it fits into the timeline of making this Pomni V2 doll. Hey friendles, I'm Kendall and I'm not in the mood to make a fancy outro, so let's just get started. Last we left off, I had just finished my Gummigoo action figure and the body I had printed for Pomni just wasn't going to work. No matter, we can just fix that real quick. First thing I wanted to fix was the length of her legs without messing up the construction of her joints. See, that's a lot easier said than done, but somehow I managed. After that, I shrank down the foot post that pops in and out of the leg since it was too tight on the failed body. Something that didn't work on the failed body was the shoulder and hip joints. Not because the joints themselves were wrong, but because they were detached from the main body. So to fix that, I just connected these joint post thingamajiggies to the upper and lower body pieces. And doing it like this meant that I had to divide the top and bottom pieces into two separate pieces for assembly later. I hope that made sense. Pomni's head was also too small in the original print. Proportionally, it just looked off. So I scaled it up slightly and modified the neck hole. I also had to close the eye holes on the faceplate, again, because apparently I didn't save a prior version of a faceplate with no eye holes that wasn't undersized. Oops. In the last video, one of the shoulders on the failed Pomni doll cracked during assembly, so I took some time to smooth down any harsh indents, basically making sure that there are no seam lines where another break might happen. Since one of the hand's wrists also cracked, I widened the hinge on both variations of the hands and smoothed out the seam lines. Because I widened the wrist joint, I also had to widen the lower arm just a little bit. And let me tell you, doing that around internal structures you don't want to mess with, it's hard, man. I also forgot about this when I first sculpted the doll, but I went back to the gloved hands and added the little bean details. It's kinda small and innocuous, but I had to. Now that she's all fixed, it's time to print her. This version's being printed in filament, which can take a while, so to save time, I decided to try sewing the bodysuit using the failed body's proportions from the last video. The midsection's proportions were basically the same, but sewing skin-tight clothes for dolls is surprisingly difficult. I ended up sewing multiple versions, the first one by hand, the later ones with my sewing machine, and ironically, hand stitching comes back full circle later. I tend to overthink things. Shocking, I know, and the sleeves are a good example of that. Originally, I tried sewing curved shapes like the ones you'd expect on human clothes, but all you really need is a few rectangles and some ruffles. This version of the bodysuit fits well, but it wouldn't close in the back. Still, it was a good starting point and helped influence the final version later. But for now, it was time to prep the printed parts. As usual, supports had to be removed. And then the pieces had to be sanded, starting with rough sandpaper and gradually moving down to finer grits of sandpaper. And then I went to urgent care the very next day. Here's me in the waiting room, hoping the pain I was feeling in my ears, nose, and throat was bacterial. But just my luck, it was viral. So that meant no antibiotics, just vibes and misery. The doctor told me to take some pseudoephedrine for my symptoms, and I was like, yeah, I know I have it at home, but that stuff makes me really chill and sleepy. And I know that sounds really weird because it's technically a stimulant, but seriously, this stuff is basically Adderall. But I have ADHD, so you can kind of see where this is going. I took one pill and then took a nap in my computer chair later that day. Anyways, back to dolling. After all that, I started drilling the torso and bust pieces, and using a handheld drill for this stuff is hard. Since filament pieces print in plastic, I decided to cheat a little by heating up a needle and melting the holes open instead. Then I jabbed some wire through the holes and superglued everything together into one piece. Some of the filament parts didn't print completely, and I honestly kind of expected this. So I drilled little support holes and added wires in preparation for sculpting over them. To smooth things out, I tried using air dry clay instead of the plastic wood filler I used on Gummigoo. So this is more of an experiment than a full material shift. I kind of just wanted to see what I'd prefer going forward. Because they both have their pros and cons. Like the clay, it sands smoother, but it doesn't hold light-colored paint very well. It takes a lot of layers to get opaque. The wood filler is harder to sand smooth since it sometimes can crumble from too much friction, but paint becomes opaque on it a lot easier. I did learn the hard way though that both of them can get waterlogged. So if you use too much water in your paint, it can cause these like annoying little blisters to show up. So don't water your paint down too much. Or invest in some soft body acrylics. I watered down the clay into a paste and slathered it on, and once that was dry, I gave everything the old swiggity sandy into a smooth-ish finish. I also had to re-drill the holes that got filled in with clay because of course I've covered the open holes with clay. After that, it was time to prime the pieces. Except not really, some parts weren't smooth enough for me, so I went back and re-slathered them with some clay paste. Some of these leg pieces, in particular, kept breaking along a print line, so I had to super glue it together again and then re-slather it. So it was all kind of a back and forth game of slather, sand, prime, repeat. You know, it'd be like that. Eventually, you just gotta look at your stuff and go, okay, this is fine, this looks good. Don't worry about it being perfect. It's good for now. And I say this like I'm giving someone else this advice, but really I ought to take my own advice. The hands got sanded later since I had to rebuild some fingies using epoxy, and that stuff takes forever to cure. And just like the other pieces, they got slathered, sanded, primed, and slathered again. On loop until my motivation tapped out and said they're done. When you compare the failed resin body to the new filament one, the proportion difference is obvious, but so is the material difference. Resin is heavier and smoother, meanwhile filament is lighter, but needs more sanding than resin. They're both going to have their pros and cons, but if you want the real reason I use filament this time around, it's because I'm out of white resin, and resin printing is smelly. Like really smelly. Like this is going to give me super cancers if I don't invest in a fume hood and proper filter kind of smelly. And believe me, my immune system is compromised enough. Now that everything's primed and painted, it's time for assembly. This camera angle sucks at showing what I'm doing, so I'll explain. I'm threading a crotch wire into some holes at the hip joint, and that's what's going to hold the elastic, which holds the doll together. Yeah, it's not an ideal system. I have some better ideas for future dolls, but this is how it's going to be done for now. Getting the elastic under the crotch wire was a pain in the arse, mostly because I didn't think ahead about this. But I got it done eventually. Despite that, the crotch wire kept dislodging even after I superglued it in place, so I had to thread a long wire through the crotch while also supergluing the ends into the slits of the hip ball posts. I hope that made sense. If not, I'll draw you a picture. I also dabbed some superglue on the hip ball to help tighten some of the joints, although I definitely overdid it on the right one. The knees and elbows were simple enough, just a wire through the hinge and some glue to lock it in place. I forgot to record it, so take my word for it. And look at that, she stands on her own. Now that assembly's done, it's time for the dreaded wig. I've talked about my wig woes before, multiple times, but I learned some stuff from making the Princess Peach wig. I made a glued wig cap because I cannot make a sewn wig cap that isn't human sized for the life of me, so I wasn't going to try. While that dried, I made wefts out of brown yarn since the material I had on hand. I'd love to use saran doll hair someday, but I want to actually get good at styling wigs before I start investing in fancy materials. If there's one thing I learned about making doll wigs, it's to style and cut the hair as you glue on the wefts, as it's way easier than trying to cut a good amount of hair all in one go. And then I immediately ignored my own advice and blend cut the ends all at once. And now she's got a Dora the Explorer looking arse wig. Anyways, now we're gonna move on to the part most of y'all watch these videos for. It's time for the face up. Before I started drawing on her face, I dusted the joints with some white pastel because it worked really well with Gummigoo's joints and it hasn't chipped off so far. So I might as well stick to what works, right? I started her face up by adding blushing and sketching the eye outlines, and things are going pretty well. That is until I brought out the paintbrush. I made one mistake, tried to fix it, made it worse, and then said, you know what, screw it, and proceeded to wash it all off and start over. For try number 2, I don't know what came over me. I pulled a paintbrush and tried to just jump right in with the face, only to be met with immediate regret. I don't know how artists like Engelmetch just jump right in with a paintbrush, but you've got to give me your secrets, please. Try number 3. I stuck with pencil and pastels, and it actually looked really good this time. Then, for some reason, I washed it all off again. I have no clue why I did this. This face-up was honestly looking fine, but I guess perfectionism just be like that sometimes. At this point, I needed to focus on something else, so I switched gears to the body instead. I drew on her signature eye pattern on her knees, because that's something I'd been planning since the beginning. I thought that'd be very aesthetically pleasing. I gave her a good spray of Mr. Clean and came back to the face with a new mindset. Just get it done. This time I was more slow, deliberate, and tried not to overthink every stroke, starting with pastels and colored pencils. I layered on multiple strokes of pencil before switching to painting on the pigments with a brush, and I bounced between colors a lot. Especially white, because white needs a lot of layers to get opaque. And because I dusted her lids with gray, that made white layering harder to build up, so Houston, we had a problem. Eventually I got into the home stretch, and that's when I added the white highlights in her eyes. You know, I've always really liked those shiny eyes from 80s and 90s anime. I don't know how obvious that is in my art, but I want to start doing that more for future face-ups. After sealing her face for the final time, I moved to the back and added skin tone variation using pink and pale pastels. I painted the same iris pattern on her elbows, sealed everything again, and just like that, it was time to finish off what I've been putting off the longest. The clothes. Before making the final version of the clothes, I painted her gloved hands because somewhere in the back of my mind I knew skin-tight gloves weren't gonna happen. So I made the hands swappable instead. And honestly, this system of hand swappage was the right move. I mentioned this earlier, but I used the failed body to test bodysuit prototypes while I was painting the clay and letting it dry and all that stuff. And I found that the biggest issue was that I was trying to make a skin-tight bodysuit out of woven fabric. Maybe a better seamstress somewhere could pull it off with woven fabric, but in retrospect, I probably should have used a knit fabric for this sort of thing. The first bodysuit fit okay, but didn't close in the back. The second one had more fabric in the back, but was starting to look frumpy. And every iteration after that just kept getting frumpier and frumpier. It wasn't until I tried making her hat out of fabric that I admitted defeat. I wasn't at the skill level to make this idea work with the materials I had on hand, but while I was staring at the failed suit and the hat, a thought popped into my head. What about foam? I covered her torso in tape to make a pattern, cut the shapes I got from that out of some spare foam, and then hand-stitched them together. Even though I had only stitched about one side, I could see that this is all gonna come together real soon. I skipped over this earlier, but I also made a pattern for the hat based on the V1 Dolls resin hat. That came in handy here. I made the hat and bodysuit from some color-coded pieces of foam, thinking I might just paint it and call it a day, but then my inner voice told me to sew fabric on top. As usual, I just went along with the ominous voice in my head and proceeded to do so. This did make the project take even longer, but I tell myself it looks better this way. I had to hand sew everything because I don't trust foam under a sewing machine, and it wouldn't have looked as flush to the surface otherwise. Some of y'all might be asking, why not just make a fabric shell to go over the foam? And all I have to say to that is, shut up, I know what I'm doing. Oh, I hope to God I can explain this right, but to stitch the panel on the bodysuit, I layer one colored piece of fabric over the wrong color of foam, and then I stitched it in place along the foam seam line before folding over that fabric panel and leaving a clean edge. Then I just do that again a bunch more times. I did the same thing for the hat, using fabric salvaged from the failed hat because I was running out of fabric for this project. It took forever, but the results are honestly kind of fire. To make the bodysuit look more finished, I glued the raw edges inside the foam frame. After that, I needed to add sleeves and leg poofies on the limb holes. I scavenged some more fabric for the sleeves and the collar from an older version of the bodysuit, because, again, running out of fabric here. Sewing on the collar was easy enough. Sewing the poofy sleeves and pant legs was where I had to get creative. Not like that's unusual or anything. I used a marker in place of her limbs to hold the gathered fabric while I had to hand stitch it in place. Off camera. To make the poofies adjustable, I sewed in some yellow yarn so they can be tied and untied as needed. Okay, so now we're in the home stretch. For reals. Not really. To finish her off, I sewed on some pom-poms to her bodysuit and her hat. I also cut a long strip of foam for the ring around her hat, which had to be glued in place and then held in place while it dried. I cut some smaller strips of the same foam to accent the sleeves and also to cover up the raw edges. And just when I thought I was done, surprise, I forgot about the shoes and the leg warmers. I actually had previously made one blue shoe while I was making the prototype bodysuit, but I didn't think to make the red one for some reason. I MacGyvered it by sewing foam pattern pieces together and then wrapping it in fabric, gluing on the sole, and boom! Shoe! Some raw fabric edges were still showing, so I covered them with some yellow yarn. And honestly, it looks intentional, which is all that matters to me. Her feet are removable, just like her hands. So you might be asking, why not just sculpt the shoes digitally and print them? To which I say, it didn't occur to me till just now. To actually finish her off, I made the leg warmers from some fabric rectangles, and that's it. She's done. For reals this time. All that's left now is the photo shoot with Pomni and Gummigoo. But first... Okay, from this point on, I'm going to talk about some heavy stuff that involves the death of a person and a pet, so go to this timestamp on the screen if you don't want to hear about that kind of thing. You ready? Made your choice? Okay, 3, 2, 1, penguins. So after I finished Pomni, I took a few days off just to decompress and relax, and the plan was to do her photo shoot at IKEA the day after episode 6 of the amazing digital Circus dropped. But the day that episode dropped was the day I found out one of my old professors had passed away. For privacy, I'm just going to call her Masha, so I'm not going to get too detailed on who this person is. She was one of my first art teachers in college, and one of the few people who truly believed in me before I ever really believed in myself. Back then, I didn't take compliments very seriously at all. A lot of adults, they just kind of say one thing and did another. So it was not unusual for me to assume the worst, but Masha was different. Her actions, they matched her words, and even though my art was mediocre at best, with my ideas being so scatterbrained and disorganized, she saw something in me. Like, something I've only really started to see in myself over probably the past 2 years. She really wanted me to go to a certain school, which I ended up not going to. And I would kind of tell myself while I was at the school that I went to that maybe one day I'll go to that school she wanted me to for my graduate degree or something. Even though in recent years I would tell myself that it's too expensive and to just go someplace cheaper for grad school. But maybe I will go to her recommendation one day, because it was also her alma mater. Maybe. If I can make maybe making these silly videos online profitable and had that kind of money, then maybe I will. Maybe I'll try. For her, at least. I really wish I'd shown her my love for making dolls, but I really kept that part to myself outside of the internet and friends I had. There's so much I could have said, and so much things that went unsaid. So many moments where I could have shown her who I really am. But I didn't. And when life gets really overwhelming with, like, family trauma, poor work-life balance, all that other crap, it can really just distract you from what's really important until it's too late. So through a lot of on and off crying the day after and all that, I did still end up going through the photo shoot, even though I wasn't feeling it when I started it. Because I know in the back of my mind that Masha would want me to pursue my passion. Four days later, my dog died. My dog Bear. So Masha's death was a surprise, and that was harder to reconcile with because I had no idea that anything was wrong with her. But Bear, that was different. We saw Bear coming for a long time, but that kind of just didn't make it any easier. He had been bedridden since February, unable to stand on his own, and he would just bark for what he needed. Every day we told him it was okay if he was ready to go, that we'd miss him, but we'd ultimately be okay, and that if he's in any pain, we don't want that for him. And then one morning, my mom comes into my room, and she says to me, "I think Bear died." I go into the living room, and he looks so peaceful, as if nothing had happened, like he was just sleeping. I put my head on his chest, listened for a heartbeat, and there was none. He was gone. He gave us 16 and a half years. I remember when he first came into our lives on Thanksgiving 2008. I was 11 years old. That's kind of showing my age. And he was the friendliest and most playful dog. To everybody, even people who didn't deserve it. He even tried to play with rattlesnakes on a few occasions. We buried him the same day, covered him in some flowers, and I even put one of his favorite toys in the grave with him. We kept some of the flowers we didn't bury with him because they were just unopened bulbs. You know, those bulb flowers that take a while to bloom. And since then, they did bloom for a while. So yeah, as you can imagine, it's been rough. The timing, it felt really cruel as well, because around this time, July 4th, is also the anniversary of my grandmother's death. And since 2018, Independence Day really just became another day. So we didn't really do anything. We just went about our lives afterwards. But this year, a friend of mine invited me to a barbecue at his place. And something inside me just said, might as well go instead of just sitting around and doing nothing all day. And you know what? I had a really good time. It really put into perspective how isolated I've become throughout my life. And I thought this got better over the past 2 years, but I guess old habits really do die hard. I know that Masha and Bear wouldn't want me to just float through life feeling numb and exhausted, or moping around wishing I did things differently. They'd want me to live. And in making things like my silly dolls and my silly, stinky little videos, I like to think that's what I'm doing. Or maybe that is what I'm doing. Okay, that was a lot, wasn't it? So before we jump into the photo shoot, and everything, here's a clip of my brother beating frozen berries outside of our apartment.
It's f***ing rock hard.
Wow. Gonna go at it with a hammer again?
We gotta like chip at it from the inside.
I think from this point on, I'll just let most of the photos speak for themselves, kinda, but I'll pop in if I want to say something. So, enjoy the final result. happy that Pomni and Gummigoo can stand on their own now. That's something I want all of my dolls to be able to do from now on. Pomni holds poses well, although her hip is not as flexible as I would have hoped, and for some of these shots I had to pull her legs off so it makes it look like she's sitting. But compared to V1, she's a huge step up. I feel like she's got the best of both worlds when it comes to dolls and action figures. And Gummigoo got a glow up too. I'm super proud of how much his arms and legs can move, and now he can wave too. Usually this is the part of the video where I say something like, if you'd like to see more from me, link in the description, stuff like that. But I want to do something a little differently this time. So, are any of y'all Final Destination fans? Because if you are, you'd probably know that Tony Todd, the actor who played William Bloodworth, passed away last year from stomach cancer. And the final line he delivered for the franchise was something I found to be really insightful, and I think it's important for everyone to hear. I intend to enjoy the time I have left, and I suggest you do the same. Life is precious. Enjoy every single second. You never know when. Good luck. Happy Mother's Day, Happy Memorial Day, Blessed Eid al-Adha, Happy Flag Day, Happy Juneteenth, Blessed Ashura, and Shalom everyone. Keep living. Also, if there's a video of a girl in this shirt singing Toxicity by System of a Down circulating online somewhere, please let me know.